Star Wars Tabletop Gaming is proudly supported by Gatekeeper Games, your key to gaming unplugged. A tabletop games store offering a friendly atmosphere for people to buy and play their games in the north of Fitzroy. Welcome to episode 20 of Star Wars Tabletop Gaming. In today's episode, we're going to look at the 3 articles that FFG have released in the last couple of weeks, or 1 week really, I should say, as well as the release date they've given us. And also talk about little points that have stood out in these articles. Most of the information we know, but there's a number of things I want to discuss in regards to tactics, essentially, and the power levels of units that have really stood out in these articles. Now that we've kind of seen all the articles in Wave 1, we can have a bit of a better understanding of what we're looking at and what we're thinking about. So let's get into Imperial March. So Imperial March was the article that released on the 29th of January, and essentially it has given us our release date. So Legion will release on March the 22nd, which is just so far away. So we know that in Australia, Legion has been in our distributors for like 2 or 3 weeks now, and it's just sitting there in warehouses where we can't touch it. And it will continue to sit there for about another month and a half, more than a month and a half. So 2 months in distributors. Now, it stings a little because I can only assume the reason they've pushed their release date so far back is probably to get more stock to American distributors. We haven't heard reports of Legion actually being at American distributors yet, so I imagine that's why they're waiting. And I just know that if the stock was at American distributors and not at Australian distributors, that stock would be hitting stores like there was no tomorrow. It would be selling, they would not be waiting, and we would just have to suck it up. But that's what you get for being tiny with our only, 20 million people or so that we have in our small island country. So we'll just suck it up and we'll just wait until March the 22nd. I did suggest to a mate we do a bit of a black ops raid on a local warehouse and snatch some boxes, but we decided it was probably a good idea not to do that. It'd make it a little obvious when I put up YouTube channels of the stuff that we grabbed, which of course I would have to, because how could I resist? So Imperial March gives us our 22nd of March release date. It also looks at the general units that are included in the core box set and the expansions that we're going to get initially for the Imperial side. So it obviously then looks at Vader, it looks at the Stormtroopers, and it looks at the speeder bikes. So I just want to talk about a few things that we saw in it. So one thing that this article confirmed is that Force Choke does indeed allow you to select a heavy weapons trooper and choke them out. So in the picture that we see here, Vader is throwing his saber to the right at the back of that ATR Tee and is using his left hand to choke out that poor Z6 heavy weapon trooper over there. Now that is just so powerful, and it's really made me question heavy weapon troopers, which I'll discuss a little later on. But essentially, the ability to take out a 22 or 32 point unit if it's an ion weapon, or some of the stormtrooper upgrades get really expensive, just choke it out. Just look, it's a free action. You tap it. Vader, because of his shenanigans, gets to automatically untap that in his turn. Because of his special rule. Let's have a look at it. Master of the Force, during the end phase, you may ready one of your Force guards. So you can just Force choke every single turn. Now, of course, it's only range 1, which for Vader is obviously a huge disadvantage because he's so slow. But I don't know, if you start just marching towards the enemy, you're going to get to them eventually and you're going to start choking stuff out. And you can just choke something out every single turn. So, awesome stuff. I think Force Choke is probably the most powerful Force ability that we have in the core box set, and I think it's going to do a lot of damage, and it makes you really think about heavy weapon troopers. So that is Vader with Force Choke. It also shows him here with his saber throw. We all know saber throw is going to be amazing. Don't forget that the attributes of his lightsaber carry over in the lightsaber throw. So that Impact 3, Pierce 3, I'm pretty sure is going to be doing work. So it says perform a ranged attack with that weapon. Yep, 100%. I'm calling it. That Impact 3, Pierce 3 is going to go into that throw of his weapon, of his lightsaber, and means that's going to go through 3 blocks that the enemy makes, which is nuts. And of course, turn 3 of your hits into crits for vehicles. So that is just such a powerful shooting weapon. Some people were talking about Luke with his DL-44, which we'll look at in a second, and whether that was overpowered. Come on, people. With Force Throw, Vader has the best range weapon in the game. Noting, of course, it's only range 2, but I believe, how far can Luke shoot? It's not that far. Yeah, range 2 as well. So only range 2 is, that's pretty standard for a pistol weapon, or a thrown weapon, as it may be. So there we go. So that's Vader. He's going to wreck phase. He's slow, but he'll get there. He'll get there eventually. I got big hope for him. All right, the other thing we saw in Imperial March was the speeder bikes doing some shenanigans with their holdout blasters and with their what are they called? The cannons at the front. Where's their thing? Speeder bikes. What's their weapon called? It is called an AX-20 blaster cannon out the front, and the EC-17 holdout blaster. So many letters and numbers. I'm never going to memorize all these. So we see them shooting at the front and the back. Now, the player has obviously chosen to do this to decided not to shoot both cannons at Luke, which is fascinating. I mean, I don't really understand why you wouldn't unless Luke was on one wound or something, and to shoot the holdout blaster at the back. So the only reason I can think that someone would do this is because shooting two different weapons at two different units, which we've established you can do, and I figure you can only really split fire if you're shooting different weapons. That's what makes sense to me. That's kind of what we've seen in all of the pictures that they've put up. So 2 different weapons, 2 different opponents, 3 different weapons, 3 different opponents. Seems to be the general gist that I'm getting. So the reason I think you would do this is to put down suppression tokens. So if you can shoot at 2 different opponents, I assume you'd be able to put down 2 suppression tokens. Once we get the rules, we'll obviously confirm that. But certainly, if you look at something like an ATR Tee with 3 different weapons, being able to put down 3 different suppression tokens, or like, I don't know, 5 suppression tokens if you're shooting the mortar, or whatever ridiculous shenanigans you're up to, is huge. Suppression tokens, I think, are going to be so impactful. So interesting. Makes the speeder bikes certainly a little more interesting and a little more impactful on the battlefield with mixing around those suppression tokens. Especially if you give them, is it comms jammers? And that way, I mean, you're suppressing people, you're stopping them getting orders. A really cool and pretty cheap unit to just throw into the enemy's force and really mess up their plans. So cool, I like it. I really like the idea. And it matches thematically as well. Okay, so that is the Imperial March article that we got. The big one being the March 22nd release date. Next, a few days later, let's see, when did we get this article? The 2nd of February, 2018, we got to see the Rebel Recruits article, which of course is the preview of the Rebel Alliance forces in our core starter set. Now in this, we've obviously got Luke, the ATR Tee, and the Rebel Troopers. Let's look a bit at Luke. So we know Luke's going to be awesome. His 40 points, is it 40 points cheaper than Vader? Let's have a quick look. That sounds about right. 40 points cheaper than Vader. His lightsaber, I mean, it's almost as good. He's having a good try. He is far more maneuverable, especially with that jump, which I think is going to be really effective. Getting over terrain is going to be, I think, a big part of this game, especially because we've seen all those grappling hooks. The designers seem to think that moving up and down terrain is super important, otherwise grappling hooks wouldn't exist. So I think that's quite a big advantage with Luke that we're not even really thinking about yet. He's also got a surge. His attack surge is into crits, while Vader, of course, has no surge. So he's got his own advantages, and he does pretty well for himself. So what I like about Luke the most is his DL-44 blaster pistol. So you don't need to put saber throw. Can you even put saber throw on Luke? Probably not. It's probably villain only. No, it's not. That's interesting. Look, you could theoretically put a saber throw on Luke. I don't know why you would though, because you've got his sweet DL-44 blaster pistol, which has Pierce 2. And people are like, is that too much? Is Pierce 2 on a pistol too powerful? Pierce 2, of course, allows you to ignore 2 blocks from an enemy unit. So he's just going to pop off 2 stormtroopers with so much ease, with I think like 7 out of 8 results on his pistol just going through their armor like it's nothing. So that's amazing. That's really effective. It is only 2 range, so look, it is limited in that, but that's wonderful and certainly gives him stuff to do before he gets into charge range. Charge. You may perform a free melee attack action. So this makes me think that maybe Luke can do a bit of shooting and then charge and still get to attack. Now, normally you wouldn't be able to do that because you only get to do 1 attack action in a turn. But because it's a free melee attack action, I don't know. Maybe he has to do it. Maybe he doesn't. I'm not entirely sure yet. There might be something in this article that kind of hints at it, but maybe not. We'll wait and see. Either way, if he can do 2 attacks, 1 range, 1 melee, that will be out of control. And I'd love to see it. So other things on Luke, essentially the force abilities you can give him. The light side only force ability of real interest is that Jedi mind trick. Choose an enemy trooper unit at range 1 to 2. It gains 2 suppression tokens for only 5 points. That's insane. So it is tapped. It does exhaust, if you will. And Luke can't just untap or ready force upgrades like Vader can, so he will have to take an action to ready this, which seems fair because putting 2 suppression tokens on a unit is nuts. It is so good, just as a free action on the side whenever you feel like it. Here's a couple of suppression tokens. Maybe they've already got one from his DL44, and that unit, if it's a troop unit, is now just fleeing, just out of nowhere. So that's epic. And I think Luke's going to be super powerful with that Jedi Mind Trick. Look, Vader does some similar stuff with his command cards, but having it as an upgrade is amazing. Whether you'll be able to do that when you're in combat to other units you're not in combat with, or even to units you are in combat with, will be really interesting, just to have them flee while you're in combat. And we don't really know what the rules are for going into combat with a fleeing unit either. Maybe it's come out and I just haven't taken notice. But look, if you cut down a unit, if you charge into them while they're fleeing, just imagine the combo with that and the power with that. So really cool. So that's Luke. Everything else we've discussed him previously. We know lots about him. That's fine. Let's look at the ATR Tee. So we're going to skip the Rebel Troopers because we'll talk about them in a minute for the Fighting for Freedom article. But the ATR Tee is probably one of my favorite units. The Rebels is just so interesting with their vehicles. The ATR Tee, obviously super cheap, so it's only 55 points base. Now, when you start putting a gun on it, whether it be a flamethrower or a laser cannon or whatever, they start to get a little more expensive. I think the cheapest weapon for an ATR Tee is like 25 points. But at 55 points, people have been talking a lot about taking these just bare, because what they have is this grappling claw with 3 red dice. So think about it. If you take 2 ATR Tees and they come to 110 points, that's pretty much half of what Vader costs, and you're getting just as many red dice. Now, it doesn't have Pierce, obviously. It will come to Impact too, so it's almost as good there. But having 3 red dice in close combat with an attack surge that goes to crits, I might add, for only 55 points. That's insane. This vehicle is so good, and I can see a lot of Rebel players, early on at least, taking 3 ATR Tees and stomping up the battlefield and crushing all before them, especially when you start getting them into close combat with things like Stormtroopers and other trooper units, because they're going to barely be able to touch you because of your armor, whereas you will be ripping them apart. So that's the ATR Tee. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm certainly going to try taking 3. I might feel a bit guilty while I'm doing it, so I might regulate myself and only take 1 or 2. But look, if you only have points to take a bear, it's not a terrible option, and opens you up to take more troopers. Speaking of troopers, let's move on and have a look at the Fighting for Freedom article that we got just the other day on the 5th of February. And this gives us a deeper look into the Rebel Troopers, which of course is a big yawn and nothing we've really seen before. We pretty much knew all the weapons and all the rules. I mean, it confirms a couple of things in regards to iron tokens, but we had a pretty good idea already of how that all works. Grenades. I want to talk about grenades. I don't think we've entirely worked out how these work yet, but my theory is that they simply add that dice when you're within range 1. I don't think you'll have to forego a single model using a grenade. It seems really clunky and doesn't really seem like FFG's style. That's more of a horrid thing that 40k would make people do. I think it's just going to be an extra black dice, whether it be the impact grenades or the concussion grenades. The concussion grenades being blast and ignores cover, and the impact grenades being impact 1 while attacking armor. So I think it'll just be an extra dice, which, for 5 points, pretty good. To get an extra black dice with a Rebel Trooper, you're paying 10, aren't you? So seems like a pretty good deal. And I think most people will be filling up their grenade slots if they have the points. What I wanted to talk about with the Rebel Troopers was heavy weapon troopers specifically. For both armies, yes, but mostly for Rebels because of the choices that you've got. So a lot of lists that I've seen people building are including the Z6 Trooper. People are like, what? 6 white dice? That's more than a whole Stormtrooper unit's firing. That's insane. Only 22 points. It seems so good. But I'm like, does it? Does it seem good? So, of course, we all know white dice are trash. Someone did the maths, and I think 6 white dice equals 1.5 hits. Now, the equivalent of that in Rebel Troopers would be 2 Rebel Troopers, essentially, with their 2 black dice, and they're getting around the same hits as well. Now, my argument is, instead of a Z6 Trooper, I think I'd rather half a Rebel unit, or in the case of, 2 Z6 Troopers, if I had the choice between upgrading 2 units with Z6 Troopers or taking just another unit of Rebel troops, I think I'm always going to go with the Rebel troops. The advantage you have with the unit is that it can go out and get you objectives, and I think people are still underestimating how important objectives are going to be to this game. having another unit that can maneuver around on a completely other part of the battlefield, securing objectives, threatening the enemy's objectives. It's a lot more survivable than that single trooper as well. It can do pretty much the same amount of damage. Shooting at different targets, I don't think is applicable because I think we know the Z6 will be able to split fire. But the main one is it can be in a different location of Vader. And I think that's what a lot of the Rebel tactics in this early meta is going to be, is you're going to need to split up your force, because whatever force has Vader on the other side of it and has Vader coming towards it is going to get minced. So having just an extra Z6 trooper who's doing not that much damage, even with all those white dice, getting minced by Vader is going to be just trash. So having a whole other unit, however, on the other side of the table, capturing objectives, seems a lot better to me. Don't forget too, I mean, people say, well, you just aim and re-roll your Z6 dice. Well, I don't think your Rebel troopers are going to want to really be doing aim orders. They obviously get their advantages with dodges because they're nimble. As you can see here, when a dodge token goes away from getting fired at, that is you use it to negate a hit. You then get another one back straight away. So I think people are going to want to be doing dodge orders and not aim orders with their Rebel troopers. So those white dice just get worse and worse the more we talk about them. So that's my thoughts on the Z6. I could be completely wrong. They may actually dominate the game. We'll just have to wait and see. But hey, got to take a stance, right? However, the MPL 57 Ion Trooper, I think is going to be vital. I think it's going to be really important because we know the table is going to be flooded with ATR Tees. So I think these are going to be super useful. Taking away one action, or if you're using two of them, taking away two actions and, popping off a bit of health here and there from an ATR Tee is just shuts it down, just completely shuts it down, which is going to be so important. While your other troopers are firing at other stuff, these Ion Troopers all the way out to range 3 are just going to be shutting down your enemy's ATR Tees, or shutting down their snow speeders, or shutting down their ATR Tees. I think it's super useful. I will be taking MPL 57 Ion Troopers with my Rebel Trooper units. That's my theory, depending on how expensive they get, because 32 points is just so much. It's almost a whole Rebel Trooper unit, but being able to shut down ATR Tees, I think will be vital to surviving once you get close into the enemy forces, because they are going to be so powerful and just all over the place. I will not be surprised if people are trying out General Veer's 3 trooper units and 2 ATR Tees as an army base, which is just filthy and horrific and terrifying. So I'm going to be taking Iron Troopers to counter it. That's my plan. So there we go. That is the Fighting for Freedom article. That is the Rebel Troopers all summed up. Pretty much everything I think we need to say about them until we start getting them onto the table and seeing what they're really like. And now I guess we just have to wait until March the 22nd. We know there'll be a few more articles in between now and then. They're going to take a closer look at the command cards for Vader and Luke, but we know what they are, so not overly exciting. So yeah, so now I'm just getting terrain ready and just waiting and waiting until March the 22nd. So until then, until next episode, thank you very much for listening, and may the Force be with you.